I am Dr. Lori Conway, a nephrologist with more than 2 decades of clinical experience specializing in kidney disease. I have sat across from hundreds of patients who arrived in my office already facing advanced kidney damage. Patients who had no idea anything was wrong until the damage was already severe and in many cases irreversible. They were not careless people. They were not ignoring obvious signs. They simply had never been given the right information at the right time. Today, I want to give you that information clearly and directly, the way I would speak to a family member rather than a formal patient, because what you are about to learn could genuinely change the direction of your health. Before we go further, subscribe to this channel so that videos like this one reach you before the problems they address do. We cover health information that is honest, practical, and specifically relevant to the realities that older adults face. Now let us get into what your kidneys are actually doing, why they are so vulnerable, and what 4 enemies are destroying them in ways most people never see coming. Your kidneys perform a task so complex and so continuous that if engineers tried to replicate the system artificially, the machine required would fill a room. Every 24 hours, these 2 fist-sized organs filter your entire blood supply dozens of times over. They remove metabolic waste, regulate the balance of minerals your heart and muscles depend on, control your blood pressure through hormone signaling, and direct the production of red blood cells. They do all of this simultaneously, without pause, without rest, and without any sensation that would alert you when something is going wrong. That last point is where the danger lives. Your kidneys have almost no pain receptors. Chronic kidney disease does not announce itself. It does not cause the sharp ache of a kidney stone or the obvious discomfort of an infection. It accumulates the way debt accumulates when you ignore the statement, slowly, silently, and with compounding consequences. By the time symptoms appear, such as persistent fatigue that sleep does not resolve, swelling that gathers in the legs and ankles, or muscle cramps that arrive at night for no apparent reason, the damage is already deep. In many patients I have treated, kidney function has already declined by 60% or more before anything obvious has surfaced. This is why what I am sharing today is not an optional wellness conversation. It is a clinical reality that the structure of a typical medical appointment does not allow me or any other physician to communicate thoroughly enough. Now I need to help you understand something important about the relationship between age and kidney vulnerability, because it changes the risk calculation completely. The kidney's filtering capacity, measured through what we call the glomerular filtration rate, declines naturally as we age. This is not disease, it is physiology. But it means that the buffer your kidneys once had against daily stresses gradually narrows over the decades. What your 30-year-old kidneys handled without consequence, your 65 or 70-year-old kidneys handle with significantly less reserve. Think of it this way. A new pair of shoes absorbs the impact of hard pavement so effectively that you barely feel it. After years of daily wear, the cushioning has compressed. The same pavement now reaches your feet with far more force. Your kidneys work on the same principle. The same dietary patterns and lifestyle habits that your body tolerated in midlife begin producing measurable harm in later years, not because the inputs changed, but because the capacity to absorb them has diminished. Add to this the fact that high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes, the 2 conditions most likely to develop with advancing age, and the 2 conditions most responsible for kidney failure worldwide, often appear quietly and are sometimes undetected for years. These 2 conditions do not merely stress the kidneys. They systematically destroy their architecture. Uncontrolled blood pressure hammers the delicate filtering structures with pressure they were never designed to withstand. Chronically elevated blood sugar coats and scars those same structures until they lose function permanently. Everything we discuss today is connected to this central reality. Anything that worsens blood sugar, anything that elevates blood pressure, anything that reduces blood flow to the kidneys is an attack on your long-term renal health. Let us begin with the first enemy. And I want to acknowledge up front that this one does not come in a bottle or a box. It comes from a chair. Physical inactivity is a kidney risk that receives almost no attention in general health conversations, and yet its physiological impact is both direct and serious. Your kidneys are extraordinarily dependent on consistent, healthy blood flow to perform their filtration work. The millions of tiny filtering units inside them require a constant delivery of oxygenated blood at adequate pressure to function properly. When that flow is strong, the filters work efficiently, waste is cleared, and the system remains clean. When that flow becomes sluggish, the entire system begins to underperform. Here is the connection that most people miss. When you spend the majority of your day seated, watching television, reading, working at a screen, resting in a comfortable chair, your muscles remain largely inactive. Muscles in motion consume blood sugar and keep the body's insulin signaling working effectively. Muscles at rest do neither. Over time, prolonged inactivity allows blood sugar to remain elevated, which damages the fine blood vessels that feed your kidneys. Inactivity also contributes to weight gain, and excess body weight drives blood pressure upward by forcing the heart to push blood through a larger circulatory network. Both elevated blood sugar and elevated blood pressure then converge on the kidneys as the downstream target. The solution is not athletic ambition. I am not recommending that my 68-year-old patients train for distance events. The solution is consistent movement woven into daily life at a level that is manageable and sustainable. If you sit for long stretches, set a reliable reminder to stand and move for 2 or 3 minutes every hour. Walk to the kitchen, walk to the window, walk down the hallway. The physiological value of simply breaking up prolonged sitting is well documented and underappreciated. Then build from there. A 10-minute walk is not trivial. For kidney health, a modest daily walk repeated consistently produces real biological benefit by improving insulin sensitivity, supporting blood pressure control, and maintaining healthy circulation to the organs that depend on it. For those whose mobility is limited by joint pain or other conditions, seated exercises, gentle ankle rotations, arm circles, slow knee lifts provide circulatory benefit that still matters. The principle is simple and worth repeating. Any movement that keeps blood flowing is movement that supports your kidneys. Stillness, day after day, sends the opposite signal. The second enemy lives in your medicine cabinet, and it carries the particular danger of something familiar and trusted. I am talking about over-the-counter anti-inflammatory pain medications, the ibuprofen you take for a headache, the naproxen you reach for when your knee aches, the diclofenac that helps with arthritic stiffness. These medications belong to a class called NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and they are among the most commonly used medications on the planet. They are also among the most reliably kidney-damaging substances an older adult can take on a regular basis. To understand why, I need to explain a protective mechanism your kidneys rely on. Inside the kidneys, a group of hormone-like compounds called prostaglandins play a critical role in maintaining the dilation of the small arteries that deliver blood to the filtering units. Their job, simplified, is to keep those vessels open so that blood flow to the kidneys remains adequate. NSAIDs work by inhibiting the enzymes that produce prostaglandins. This is precisely how they reduce pain and inflammation, by blocking the chemical signals that generate both. But that inhibition is not selective. It does not spare the prostaglandins protecting your kidney circulation while targeting only the ones producing joint discomfort. It suppresses them throughout the body simultaneously. The result in the kidneys is constriction of the very arteries that keep them supplied with blood. In a young, healthy person taking ibuprofen occasionally for an acute injury, the kidneys can recover without lasting damage once the medication clears. But in an older adult taking these medications regularly for chronic pain, which is an extremely common pattern given the prevalence of arthritis, back pain, and joint disease in later life, the repeated constriction creates progressive damage. The filtering tissues experience episodes of reduced oxygen delivery. Microscopic scarring develops. The damaged areas stop functioning. And because this accumulates without pain or warning, patients continue the medication, believing it to be benign, while the harm compounds silently. I have treated patients who arrived at my office with significantly reduced kidney function, who had been taking over-the-counter anti-inflammatories daily for years. Their primary care physicians sometimes did not know. Their families did not know. The patients themselves had never considered that something available at any pharmacy without a prescription could be contributing to organ failure. The absence of a prescription does not indicate the absence of risk. For the kidneys of older adults, that logic has caused genuine harm. Safer approaches exist for chronic pain management. Acetaminophen, used within the recommended dosage, is generally far less harmful to kidney function than NSAIDs. Physical therapy, targeted strengthening exercises, and appropriate heat and cold applications can reduce the frequency with which pain relief medication is needed at all. But the most important step is transparency with your medical team. If you are using anti-inflammatory medications regularly, that information needs to be part of your clinical picture. Kidney function needs to be monitored, and the trade-off between pain relief and renal risk needs to be a conscious decision made with medical guidance rather than an automatic reflex reached for in the cabinet. The third enemy is one that most people are already aware of in principle, but dramatically underestimate in practice: sodium, excessive salt intake. And the reason the underestimation happens so consistently is that most people frame their sodium consumption around what they add at the table. They tell me they do not salt their food. They tell me they cook without much added salt, and they mean it. But the sodium that threatens kidney health primarily does not come from the salt shaker. It comes from the food before you ever open a container. The vast majority of dietary sodium in a typical modern diet, estimates consistently place this above 70%, arrives through processed and packaged foods. Bread, canned soups, deli meats, hard and soft cheeses, frozen entrees, salad dressings, condiments, breakfast cereals, foods that carry no particular salty flavor perception, but contain sodium in quantities that accumulate rapidly across a day of ordinary eating. The food industry uses sodium not only for taste, but for texture, preservation, and to compensate for the reduced natural flavor of highly processed ingredients. It is embedded in the product before it reaches your kitchen, and it is invisible until you read the label. What excessive sodium does inside the body is shift the fluid balance your kidneys are constantly working to maintain. The kidneys require only a narrow amount of sodium to perform their regulatory functions. When sodium arrives in excess, the body responds by retaining fluid to dilute it. Blood volume increases, blood pressure rises, and the consequences of sustained high blood pressure on kidney tissue are severe and well documented. The filtration membranes, which are delicate by nature and made more fragile by age, experience mechanical damage from the elevated pressure. Over years, they scar. Their function diminishes. The cycle of sodium-driven pressure and pressure-driven kidney damage is one of the most direct pathways to chronic kidney disease that I see in clinical practice. The practical response to this enemy requires shifting the focus from what you add to your food to what is already in it. Checking sodium content on nutrition labels before purchasing is more effective than any dietary restriction applied at the table. A practical threshold many nephrologists use is 350 milligrams of sodium per serving as a reference point for lower sodium choices. An awareness that multiple servings of multiple products across a day can bring total sodium intake well above recommended limits without a single deliberate addition of salt. Rinsing canned vegetables and legumes under water before using them removes a meaningful percentage of their added sodium. Cooking with fresh ingredients and seasoning with herbs, citrus, and spices rather than salt produces food that is both genuinely flavorful and genuinely protective. This is not deprivation. It is a recalibration of what flavor actually means when it is not buried under sodium. And now we reach the final enemy, the one that in my clinical experience causes more kidney failure than any other single factor. The one I consider the most urgent conversation in preventive nephrology today. That enemy is refined sugar, and its companion in metabolic destruction, refined white flour. I want to be precise about why these two substances deserve to be discussed together. To your body's insulin and glucose response systems, they are functionally nearly identical. White flour, stripped of its fiber and nutrient content through industrial processing, is broken down by digestive enzymes into glucose almost as rapidly as pure sugar. The food industry has separated these two ingredients in the public mind, allowing marketing to present products loaded with refined flour as something fundamentally different from products loaded with sugar. Metabolically, the distinction is far narrower than that framing suggests. A white bread roll and a sweetened beverage drive your blood sugar through similar responses. And it is that blood sugar response, repeated across meals, across days, across years, that constitutes the central attack on kidney function. Here is the biological mechanism in full. When blood sugar rises and remains elevated over time, the condition we call type 2 diabetes develops. The kidneys become one of its primary targets for a specific reason. The filtering units inside the kidneys contain some of the most intricate networks of microscopic blood vessels in the entire body. These vessels require precise blood sugar regulation to maintain their structural integrity. When blood sugar stays elevated chronically, these vessels begin to suffer damage at a microscopic level. The filtering membranes become stiff. Proteins that should remain in the blood begin leaking into the urine, which is why proteinuria, the presence of protein in urine, is one of the earliest detectable signs of diabetic kidney disease. Waste that should be cleared begins accumulating instead. The process is gradual, relentless, and ultimately structural. The kidney architecture is being physically altered by the sustained exposure to elevated glucose in a process that cannot be reversed once it reaches a certain threshold. Sugar also contributes to blood pressure elevation through mechanisms that operate independently of sodium. Chronic high sugar intake promotes systemic inflammation throughout the body's vascular system. Inflamed arteries become stiffer. Stiffer arteries require higher pressure to push blood through them. The kidneys, sitting at the downstream end of that pressure, receive the impact. Sugar, in this way, functions as both a direct attacker of kidney filtration tissue and an indirect amplifier of the blood pressure damage already discussed. Refined flour adds an additional dimension of risk through its contribution to visceral fat accumulation. Because refined flour delivers calories rapidly without fiber, satiety signals are delayed. Overeating is easy and common. The fat that accumulates around the abdominal organs, which clinicians call visceral adiposity, is biologically active in ways that ordinary body weight is not. It releases a continuous stream of inflammatory compounds into the circulation that damage blood vessels, impair insulin signaling, and create the metabolic environment in which kidney disease progresses fastest. I have seen patients arrive in my clinic for the first time with advanced kidney disease who had diets that appeared reasonable on the surface, not obviously excessive in junk food, not notably heavy in obvious sweets, but who had been consuming substantial amounts of refined flour through white bread, white rice, pasta, crackers, and packaged snack foods for decades. The metabolic load of that pattern, sustained across a lifetime, have produced exactly the kind of progressive damage that brings a patient to a nephrologist's office. Addressing this risk requires understanding sugar in its full range of disguises. Food manufacturers use more than 50 different terms for sugar in ingredient lists. Fructose, glucose, maltose, dextrose, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, cane juice, malt syrup, and rice syrup are among the most common. A product that lists 3 or 4 different sugar derivatives appears to contain less sugar than it does because each individual entry looks smaller on the label. Reading the total sugars line on the nutrition facts label is more reliable than scanning ingredient names. Products with more than 10 or 12 grams of added sugar per serving deserve careful consideration before becoming regular parts of the diet. The shift away from refined carbohydrates does not require eating in a way that feels restrictive or joyless. Whole grain bread provides the same basic function as white bread with dramatically better glucose response characteristics. Brown rice and legumes replace white rice with far less metabolic burden. Fruit satisfies the desire for sweetness while delivering fiber that moderates the glucose response. These substitutions are not medical sacrifices. They are upgrades to foods that produce both better flavor and better biological outcomes once the palate adjusts, which it reliably does within a few weeks. Let me bring these four enemies together in a way that makes the protective strategy visible as a whole. Physical inactivity reduces the blood flow your kidneys depend on and opens the door to the metabolic conditions that damage them most. Regular anti-inflammatory pain medication use directly restricts the blood supply to your kidneys' filtering units and causes progressive scarring that accumulates silently. Excessive sodium elevates blood pressure and creates a sustained hydraulic force that damages the delicate membranes inside your kidneys over years. And chronic high intake of refined sugar and flour drives blood sugar elevation, promotes systemic inflammation, and produces the most common direct cause of kidney failure worldwide. None of these enemies require catastrophic dietary failures. None of them require dramatic negligence or extraordinary consumption. They operate through ordinary habits repeated consistently over time in a body whose capacity to absorb their effects has diminished with age. This is why they are so dangerous. They look like normal life. They feel like nothing. And they produce outcomes that by the time they become visible are already severe. The framework for protecting yourself has the same quality of being accessible and achievable rather than requiring wholesale life transformation. Move regularly, even briefly, and break up long periods of sitting. Before using over-the-counter pain medications chronically, consult a medical professional and discuss kidney function monitoring. Check sodium content on food labels and redirect your purchasing toward products that fall below reasonable sodium thresholds per serving. Cook from fresh ingredients when possible. Reduce your dietary dependence on refined flour and added sugar through realistic substitutions rather than elimination. And if any of this conversation raises questions about your own risk level, ask your doctor to include kidney function in your routine blood work. A simple measurement can establish your baseline and detect change before that change becomes irreversible. The kidneys working inside you right now are extraordinary in their complexity and their dedication. They have served your body without a day off for your entire life. What they ask in return is not perfection. It is awareness. The kind of awareness that lets you make small, consistent decisions that honor what they do rather than quietly undermining it. That awareness is what you have now that you did not have before this conversation began. If this information has given you something useful, share it with someone who matters to you. The gap between knowing this and not knowing it can be the difference between catching a problem early and arriving at a specialist's office when it is already advanced. Leave a comment below and let me know which of these 4 risk factors you were least aware of before today. I read the responses and they shape the content that follows. Subscribe and stay connected. The next video continues this conversation in equally practical terms. I am Dr. Elena Vasquez. Take care of the organs that take care of everything else.